out. Thanks to you, View the Streams. We appreciate your support. We're in Isaiah chapter 46 this morning. Isaiah chapter 46. And we are looking about this subject of God taking care of us. He says in Isaiah chapter 46 and verse number 3 that He's borne us from the belly. He's carried us through the womb. He says, even to your old age. In verse 4, I have made, I will bear, even I will carry, and will deliver you. And we will get a little bit more into that here in a moment. But when we're thinking about this subject of God taking care of us, we can compare it to different things. In Isaiah chapter 46 and verse 1, it gives an immediate comparison. Because it talks about Bel bowing down and Nebo stoopeth. Well, both Bel and Nebo are false gods. And these were gods that often Israel had worshipped at some time. Nebo was another one that was worshipped. And when you think about this thought of relying on something that is not the true God, because these images that were being worshipped, they were carried around. It says their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy loaded. They are a burden to the weary beast. So here, the interesting thing is that when we leave out God, all of a sudden we're left with this. We're left with the fact that we end up having to do everything ourselves. And so as these false idols are being worshipped, they're wearing down the beast that they're on. And I would say even more than just the beast, they're wearing down the people that are serving them. You see, you read in Proverbs that the way of the froward is difficult. It's hard. It's hard, really, to live a life of sin. It seems quite easy, but we realize that there are many problems that begin to happen. You see, each one of us faces difficulties. Whether or not we serve the Lord or whether or not we serve the things of sin, we're going to face difficulties. But the reality of the matter is that a difficulty isn't quite as difficult as if there's a way to overcome it. So let's use something very simple to try to give you an idea about this. Let's say there is something that needs to be moved. And let's say that the item that needs to be moved is quite heavy. We'll just make a number. Let's just say it's about 200 pounds. Well, there may well be some people that could easily lift the 200 pounds, but for a lot of people that would be a fairly difficult obstacle. But if you have some kind of item to move the thing, like maybe a dolly or a lift system or pulley, then it would be quite easy to move the 200 pounds, and it would be not a very difficult obstacle. But without having those things and having to rely on yourself entirely, you would find it quite difficult. Even if you were able to pick up the 200 pounds, you would have to exert a lot of effort, a lot of strength, and it would be a much more difficult task. So let's use something, a life example to try to get this even closer. Let's say in your life that you are facing a very serious health issue. Well, obviously, unless you happen to have a good doctor that knows the solution for your problem, then you're going to find it very difficult. Now, you may try to look up different things on the different searches. You may look on Google or somewhere else trying to find a home remedy for whatever it is you're suffering with. But until you are able to get to a doctor and get a diagnosis and possibly some medicine or some other procedure, you're likely not to get a whole lot better because you're relying upon your own strength. Now let's get more to a spiritual application here. If you're relying upon yourself to deal with sin, you're going to find life very difficult. Why? Because you're fighting against an adversary that you do not have the power to beat. The devil is a very strong adversary. We know that because we see countless numbers of people that are taken in sin. And not only are they taking in sin, but they do things that are very ungodly. We wonder how in the world someone could do something like that. You know, just last night, actually I should say yesterday afternoon, one of the presidential candidates was shot in the ear. Now, thankfully it seems to be okay, but you wonder how someone could go and sit on a rooftop and try to shoot someone from 400, 500 feet away. We wonder what gets a person to that. I remember a number of years ago, it's been a long time now, about 20 years ago I believe it was, where there was a sniper that was going through, I believe it was Virginia and some other states. I think there were 9 or 10 if I remember correctly. The sniper was randomly shooting people. Literally, they were trying to find this fella that had just been randomly shooting people. It was literally at random. He was eventually found, and they brought him into capture, and he was obviously brought to trial. You wonder how people can do things like that, except for you begin to realize that sin is a very powerful agent. There have been many serial killers that have been caught, and they begin to question them. The serial killers many times have very little to no remorse for what they've done. They considered it just another thing that they did in their lives. They have brought in many that had killed many people, and a lot of times the people that are around them say they seem to be some of the most evil people you can be around. You wonder what gets a person to that place, and then you realize that sin's a hard taskmaster. But let's bring it a lot closer to home, because a lot of people say, well, you know, I'm not a serial killer, thank the Lord, and I've never got on a building and sniped at someone, but we do all kinds of sniping in our life. Not the actual sniping from a gun, but the sniping of words, as we often criticize people and put people down, and people are hurt, many times hurt very, very difficultly. We find that one of the common things that happens among teens these days is for people to kill themselves. They lose their sense of worth, and they find very little reason to live, and many times it's because of bullying, and because they feel that their worth is of nothing. You see, sin's a hard taskmaster. And here we find that worshiping a God that isn't true, that is a false god, that's simply an idol, is actually a burden. It says here in Isaiah 46 and verse 1 that the beasts were brought low, they were often carried on cattle, they are a burden. Verse 2 tells us they stooped, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. Now here comes the amazing thing about it all. When we begin to put our trust in all of these other things, we find a very severe difficulty. It's this, that these gods that we are serving are not able to help us. They don't care about our burden. They don't care that we're brought low. Not only do they not care, they don't have the power to deliver themselves. And so what often happens is a person ends up in severe difficulties. Let's take a teenager that is brought into a difficult situation. They get involved in some kind of addiction. And what begins to happen is that addiction begins to control their lives. And then they find very little help from the devil to get out of their situation. Besides, he is typically making it worse. And so the devil makes it worse and makes it harder. And they get deeper and deeper into, they begin to have health issues many times, and their families begin to suffer. And they find no counsel at all from the devil. He's very happy to let them go to their destruction. You see, it's an amazing thing. The devil doesn't care about your life. He doesn't care about you. He's happy that your life is being destroyed. Let's think for just a moment about a person that gets involved in the spiritual things. There are so many people that have got involved into false religions and false doctrines, and it begins to enslave their lives as they try to do all of these things. I think of the Islamic religion where there are to do 5 prayers a day, and they have to pray towards Mecca, and there's these different things to do, these diets that you have to follow, and all these different things. And with all of the burdens of it, you have no guarantee that you're even going to be found pleasing to God. But I want to tell you that God is far different. Because while these false gods and the false things of the world will allow you to bow down and stumble and won't care about your life at all, verse number 3 tells us, "Hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, which are born by me from the belly, which are carried from the womb. Even to your old age I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear, even I will carry, and will deliver you." See, here's what God says. Those other things, they don't care about you. This world doesn't really care about you that much except for what they can gain from you. And if the devil doesn't care about you at all, he's very happy to allow you to go into destruction. But God says this, "I carry you and will deliver you." He says, "I are born by me from the belly, which are carried from the womb." This is an amazing thing. You know that God cares about you before you're ever born. That's an amazing thing. Before you ever come out of the belly, the Bible says that God cares about you. He says, "I bear you even then." He says, "I'm taking care of you in the belly." He says, "I'm carried from the womb." God has carried you from the very time that you were born. Whether or not you believed in God or not, God has had his protecting hand on your life. This is the amazing mercy and grace of God, because if God were to remove his protecting hand, the devil would destroy you. Why? Because the devil is out to destroy and God's out to save. God says, "I've carried you, I've helped you." He says, even when you get old and this world won't care about anything about you, God says, "I will carry you." You see, God cares about every part of your life. Cares about you before you're ever born. He cares about you from the time you're a little baby. He cares about you as you go through the adolescent years. He cares about you when you become a teenager. He cares when you're a young man or woman. He cares about you when you get to the middle-aged years of life and the difficulties begin to come on. He cares about you when you're old, and he loves you and says, "I'll deliver you." The difference between serving God and the devil is the devil is interested in destroying you and is interested in bringing you into bondage and imprisonment, and God is interested in delivering you and saving you from the things of sin. The wonderful thing about God is that he's not limited in his power. One of the difficult things about serving the things of this world is we find out the world has very serious limitations. Because there comes a point when maybe the doctor doesn't have the prescription that will save you. And they say, "Well, there's no cure. It's incurable." Or maybe you come to the point where you're so addicted to things that you can't seem to find a way out. The road's dark ahead. You don't see a way out. You can't see the light of day. Maybe depression comes upon you and different things, and you get down and you just can't find a way out. And you wonder, what are we going to do? The world doesn't have very many good solutions. They might put you on medicine or therapy, but they don't really have a solution for your problem. What is the answer to your problems? Well, the answer is in God, because he can carry and deliver. He says, from the very time before you're even born, I can carry you, I can hold you, I can deliver you. So we can either go to God, who is able to deliver us and able to carry us, or we can put our cares and pressures on the things of this world and find out that they become a very big burden to us. I would compare, just very quickly, and we're going to close here in a moment, but we will compare two things. Let's compare two items. Let's compare a man without the help of God. We just make up some circumstances that I think would be relatively prudent to each one of our lives. Say that there's a man, He goes through childhood, and he has a lot of difficulties, and his friends are, obviously there's a lot of peer pressure, and he begins to get into some things. His parents really aren't that interested in the things of God, and so he kind of just goes through the motions, and we find that, we'll call him Little Johnny, he gets in a lot of trouble, as many young people do. He gets in trouble with the teachers every now and then. He gets in fights here and there, and he kind of works his way through it, and he gets into the teenage years, and Little Johnny begins to make some friends, and they do some things maybe that aren't quite so good. He gets involved himself into some things, and maybe into some smoking and some drinking, and maybe some drugs here. Little Johnny, he's living life. He begins to get a little older, and he finds himself a girlfriend, and pretty soon there's some things that go on, a lot of immoral activities, and he's just kind of making his way through life. His relationships aren't really working out that well. A lot of them are falling apart, and he's just kind of making it. He's gotten himself addicted to some things. He's just trying to make it through life. He gets a little older, and he begins to get a job, and a lot of times the jobs don't work out so well. He'll be at one place for a while and here another. Little Johnny finds himself in a lot of debt. He finds himself in a lot of broken relationships. Many times there are children that get involved, and Little Johnny is just trying to make his way through life. He gets into his middle-age years, and he's struggling, and a lot of his relationships haven't worked, and really trying to find a reason even for living. He's gotten himself so addicted he can never get himself out anymore. He's kind of jokes his way through life. He's got a lot of medical issues, a lot of despondencies. He looks back with a lot of regrets. See Little Johnny trying to live his way without God. But I would compare it to a moment for a person that put their life in trust in God. They grew up a lot like Johnny did. They go to school, call him Little Timmy. Little Timmy goes to school. He has the same issues, the same things that Little Johnny faced. Even maybe gets a few friends that aren't quite so good, and maybe even begins to develop a few habits that aren't too good. But let's say in his teenage years, Little Timmy gives his life to God. Little Timmy gives his life to God. He begins to follow after the Lord, and he leaves off those things and gets out of those addictions by the help of God, and he's delivered, and he goes and he finds himself a good, godly woman. Timmy's life is completely different. Timmy begins to search the Word of God, begins to pray and hold on to the Lord. And we find that Timmy faces a lot of the same problems, and yet they're far different. Relationship issues are brought before God, and God begins to help them. The challenges of life and the complications he brings before the Lord, and God helps him. God helps him as he attends his church and in his job, and he's a faithful worker. Why? Because he's serving God, and God's helping him. He gets into the middle-age years, and instead of the questions and the regrets, he's got praise for how God's delivered him and God's helped him. And even as he gets older, he looks back and he begins to worship and praise God for all that he's done. You see, very, very similar people faced a lot of the same challenges. Yet one of them put God first, and the other one chose the things of this world. The one way we find all kinds of regrets and sorrow and all kinds of issues and problems, unresolved conflict. Why? Because the things of sin are a burden. The other we find joy and praise and wonder because God has delivered. The issue is very, very clear this morning, yet there's a whole lot of people that are serve Baal, serve Nebo, serve the things of this world, get themselves into all kinds of conflict where there's no way out. But thank the Lord, there's a God that reaches out his hand and says, I'm the true God. I've made you, I carried you, I'll deliver you if you put your faith and trust in me. I challenge you this morning. Let's get rid of Baal and Nebo. Let's get rid of the things of sin. Let's put our trust in God and find that he will carry and deliver us. Thank the Lord for all of you that come out. Thanks to you of you the strings. We appreciate your support. Pray that you have a wonderful afternoon in the Lord. We're prayed up, blessed up, and ready to go on. Have a wonderful day.